everyone. I'm Jodi Wolff, and I am joined here by some of the really cool young people in our community. And today we're going to talk about the transition to adulthood and living as a young adult with congenital muscular dystrophy. So, a few things that let's see here. All right. So I'm going to do just a real brief overview of the transition to adulthood. As you know, all of you that have young people with muscular dystrophy, you know they have the same hopes and dreams and plans for the future as their non-disabled peers. They do tend to have lower rates of college attendance and employment. But as these four up here are going to show you, this is all achievable and can be done. And they're going to share with you their stories and how they made it happen for them. Just a little overview of transition. In the teen years, there's a lot of different transitions. It's not just the transition to healthcare, which is switching or transitioning to an adult model of care, but they're transitioning in school, work, relationships, their view of independence. They are learning self-advocacy skills and finding their voices. The general rule in transition is the earlier that you begin to prepare, the better equipped you are. For all of these types of transitions, usually you start in early teens, like 13, 14 years old, regardless of the setting. There's actually mandates that schools need to start transition planning for after high school at 14. But then also, parents no longer have legal control over the healthcare decisions of their children when they're 18. And there are a lot of options to deal with this. So you talk with your healthcare providers about that. That planning needs to occur as well. And there are a number of options. So anywhere from least restrictive, where your kids are signing a consent so that you can talk to their doctors, to more formal legal guardianship. And then they have to navigate a whole new world of adult services. So Medicaid changes, Medicaid waiver, voc rehab, Social Security, ABLE savings accounts. These are all a whole new world. And from the youth that I've talked to, and we'll see what these guys think up here, many youth identify the important role of parents to their success as adults. So, healthcare transition is something that you'll want to talk about with your providers, as it's actually becoming increasingly a big concern in our community. It's really just the process of getting ready for healthcare as an adult. And so there are a lot of differences between, and those of you who have been through it, or you have adults or you are an adult with congenital muscular dystrophy, you know that there are a lot of differences between pediatric and adult healthcare settings and providers. Transitioning in healthcare doesn't always mean that you transfer your care to adult providers, but it does mean that those conversations change. And that your young person is going to be spending more time alone with their physicians. They're going to have more adult conversations. They're going to be taking on their responsibility of care and learning more about their disease. So, and then also in the healthcare realm, there tends to be more risk-taking behavior in young adulthood as well. So, that's just a small little overview of transition, but let's ask the real experts. Up here we have Luke, Kings, Liam, and Angela. And so I'm going to turn it over to them, and I would love for you guys just to introduce yourselves, say where you're from, just maybe a little bit about like your education and your work, and maybe the type of CMD that you have.
All right, I guess I'll go first. My name's Liam Miller. I'm 19. I'm from Doylestown, so just an hour outside of Philadelphia. I have Call 6. I'm also a sophomore at Temple University, studying computer science. And I live on campus, which is pretty awesome, and I'm sure I'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, that's about me.
I'm Luke Hoban. I'm also from outside Philadelphia. I'm 21 years old. I just graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in May. And so now I have college in 6, congenital muscular dystrophy. And so now I'm trying to go out into the world and figure out my life and my plan.
Hey y'all, I'm King's Floyd. I'm 23 years old. I have myrcene deficient, so LAMA 2. I graduated college last year from High Point University in North Carolina, and I actually do youth transition work for young people with disabilities as a job.
I'm Angela Maccarrone. I'm 23 years old. I also graduated last year in 2016 from Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I have SEPN1 congenital myopathy. Right now, I currently work as a scheduler and receptionist at the Seattle Children's Hospital Autism Center.
Great. So let's get to the fun stuff first. If you guys could help us get to know you a little bit better, tell us about your hobbies and what keeps you busy and what kind of things you like to do.
So I play on a wheelchair hockey team with Luke Hoban here, and that takes up a lot of my life. Hockey's my big passion. I watch it, I play it, I breathe it, I sleep it. So I do most of that. Computer science I'm interested in. Obviously that's my major, but I like computers, video games, photography, amateurly of course. That's about it.
I also play hockey. I usually beat Liam because I'm better than him at hockey, but that's fine. So I do that. I also I've gotten a lot more interested in politics over the last year. I like to read and write as much as I can, and I also, enjoy hanging out with my brother and doing whatever I'm doing with him, causing mischief.
Now I feel like I have to say I like hanging out with my sister, which I do, but she's not here. I'm a huge foodie. I love to cook. I read and write. I've actually been published a couple of times for disability rights. I am very engaged in the disability rights community, so I promise I'm a good role model, but I have been arrested 2 times for disability rights. Thank you. I'm from Maine, so I really like outdoor activities, hiking, water skiing, boating. I don't play hockey, but I'm pretty athletic. And I recently moved last year to DC, so I love exploring DC.
Like I said before, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, so a new interest of mine has been just enjoying time outside. And so I have a goal of trying to visit as many national parks as I can. So, as I said, being outside in the Northwest, and then also kind of what King said, I'm really involved with disability advocacy. Work keeps me pretty busy right now, but I work a lot with the Muscular Dystrophy Association. I am an ambassador for them, so that's a really big passion of mine, working with people with various disabilities, whether that's neuromuscular disorders or not. And then I'm also a pretty big foodie. I love to travel and explore new restaurants and coffee shops in the area, so yeah.
Great. So I think that a lot of young people really want to go to college and pursue education, but with their physical needs aren't exactly sure how to coordinate that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made that transition and how you coordinated your care, if you needed any at college, and just what that experience was like for you?
So for me personally, a lot of it was just asking people I knew who went before me to college. Luckily, I knew Luke, who was a couple years ahead of me. So he had been through the ropes of finding care, and finding dormitories and stuff like that and resources. So for me, that was a huge one, finding people who did it before me and then just kind of figuring out what they did that would benefit me in the long run. So for me, I have nursing nursing at night and then attendance during the day. And throughout the year, I kind of figured out which worked best for me. But for me personally, it was my parents definitely guided me in the right direction. My mom is pretty active online in this community, so asking people who went through it was pretty big, and then for me to talk to them one-on-one was also a big step for me.
Yeah, so I also talked to some people who were older than me and who had gone through that process, so I would highly recommend that. I also found during the process of applying to college, it was very helpful because I knew I wanted to stay near Philadelphia, just stay close to home, near my family, near my doctors, and there are a lot of schools there. But what we did is when we were applying to colleges and looking around, we would contact the Disability Services Department at the schools, even before I applied or before I went there for a visit, and just sort of talk to them through what I might need and what they could provide. And some of them were very responsive and very helpful, and some of them weren't, and some of them were I personally want to be helpful, but my school doesn't really give us any funding or doesn't help us very much. So we sort of crossed them off the list, and that was very helpful, just sort of screening out those places that weren't going to be able to necessarily help with transportation or a dormitory that would be accessible and what I would need, or a campus that was going to be easy for me to navigate. And we did that during the applications process, and that was helpful so that we weren't necessarily ambushed after I had already decided where I was going to go. And then once I made that decision, it was much easier because I had already contacted that department to get the ball rolling on, what kind of dorm room I was going to need, bathroom. I had 24/7 home health aid and nursing care, so making sure that they could get into my dorm and help me out and stay nearby, even though they weren't students. We had already started that process as early as we could, and that really helped ease the transition once we knew where I was going to go by the spring of my senior year.
What funding agencies did you work with to help provide that?
Oof.
OBR. Yeah, VR is a big one. For me personally, they added a little bit to tuition, but in the beginning, they did a lot to figure out which school would be best, because they do have. So I go to Temple University. They have a VR counselor on campus, literally across the street from where I live. So that was very convenient for me. At the moment, it's not completely 100% helpful because their main objective is to help for finding work once you get to the workforce. And a lot of what they do is just for work. So college-based help is not their expertise, but they do assist in that. And then they make sure that you're on the right track once you're at college.
If you want to, the short answer is I'm not as familiar with that side of things. Probably some other people on the stage. I was lucky that I had a big support system, and my parents were very helpful in just sort of taking that pressure off me, so I didn't have to worry about that when I was going through that. I will say that the Disability Services Department at Penn was very helpful in providing, there were some financial things that were available, different one-off scholarships for equipment that I might need and stuff like that. But obviously that's more specific to my school than, OVR would be. So I'm sorry, I can't really help out more with that.
Sure. So I freaked my parents out, and I went to school a 14-hour drive away from where I lived. My parents live in Maine, and I went to school in North Carolina, and it was honestly one of the best choices that I made. I started looking at schools in my sophomore year of high school. And before I reached out to the school itself, I reached out to the disability support services in that school. And I made up a generic list of questions for my needs that I know I would need to check off in order to make that successful. Stuff like, what academic accommodations can you provide? What do your dorm houses look like? Do you have accessible buttons? Do you have, what kind of dining options do you have? All of the basic generic questions that you or your child know that they'll need. I also use personal care assistant services, but I don't really need a lot of medical help. I need help throwing clothes in the laundry, and I need help cleaning up. And I need to be supervised when I get out of the shower because it's wet and slippery. But I don't have that complex medical needs. And so I actually wanted to open up the opportunity for students on campus to have a job. And I interviewed students themselves, and I actually found a couple of my best friends that way because they knew what I needed. They were all female. They knew what kind of support I wanted. But they were also a social in to the school. It was kind of like a built-in friend. And that's a really great experience. Because it wasn't medically sanctioned, I guess, we paid for it out of pocket. I applied to a lot of scholarships. I want to say for those of you who are near the college application process, using your disability for college applications is not a bad thing. It's even a good thing because then they know that you are disabled and there is no question about it. One great resource that has already been brought up is vocational rehab. But another thing that I would mention, and you should start doing this whatever age you are right now, is contact your local Center for Independent Living. They are a great resource. Most of them have loan closets. So if you have a chair blowout or you need different parts, they are great for that. Many of them have a mentoring program, so contacting other local youth with disabilities in your area. And the third thing is some of them have scholarships. Some of them have personal care programs that you can get through your state. And they are a great resource to start at any age. Now that is a plug because I do all of their youth transition work across the country. But that means that I know that they're a great program and I know what resources they can provide. A lot of them have connections with the community, so therapeutic pool swimming, therapeutic horseback riding, different PT and exercise programs, they're tapped into that. And I contacted my Center for Independent Living when I was in North Carolina, and while I didn't use some of the resources, they were really helpful in getting me acquainted with the area and seeing what I could pull from that space.
So there's 3 different things that really prepared me to be an independent and thriving college student. The first thing was as I was growing older into my teenage years, late teenage years, on my way to young adulthood, is really taking ownership of my disability and understanding all of the medical terminology and not necessarily relying on my parents to speak up for me at doctor's appointments, but really taking ownership of it, understanding what I needed to know about my BiPAP machine and how to work it if something goes wrong with it, knowing just basic information about my pulmonary function, just basic medical history and information about my disability so that when I'm on my own and in college, if anything were to go wrong or if I got pneumonia or something like that and had to go to the doctor or the hospital, I could be my own advocate and take care of myself and get myself the help that I would need away from home, away from my parents. I said I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I went to school in Spokane, Washington, which I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the geography of Washington State, but that's about a 5-hour difference, which is not that big, but it's far enough. So again, the first thing, take ownership of your disability, understand it, be your own advocate. The second thing is, which was already touched on a little bit, is gathering as much information as you can about the schools that you're applying to and the school that you decide to end up going to. Understanding the campus. Is it flat? Is it uneven? Do you have a mobility chair or scooter? Do you walk? Is the terrain going to be difficult for you? How accessible are all the buildings? Are there little push buttons to open the door? Are there elevators? You'd be surprised how many old buildings on campuses that, they need to have elevators for ADA, but not all of them do. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Can you access laundry services in your dorm? What are the dorms like? Are you going to be comfortable living there? And then also checking out the disability resource offices that each college campus will have and getting to know them and build relationships with them. So when you do end up going to college or that school, they know you. And if should anything come up on that campus that's a problem for you, they already have a relationship with you and they're prepared to work with you. And it doesn't become an issue should something come up. And then also understanding what accommodations you might need. In college, King said she made a list of exactly everything that she might need. That's really helpful, so then you can streamline the process and there aren't any surprises. And then the third thing that was really helpful for me, I'm not sure if all states have this option, but in Washington State, there's this program called the Do It program, and it stands for Disability Outreach, Internetworking, and Technology. So what it is it's a high school to college transition program that teenagers apply to, and it basically prepares them to be their own self-advocate and really take ownership of being an independent young adult and prepare them for college. So should you get accepted to the program, what you do is it's 3 summers in a row, and so you spend 2 weeks on the University of Washington campus, and they treat you like a college student. So you go to classes, you live in the dorms, you meet people, you go to workshops about like resume building and division of vocational rehab and just anything you might need to know to be a college student. You eat in the cafeteria, and there's also fun things too. You have field trips and dance parties and all that, and meet a lot of different peers with various disabilities. So that really gave me the confidence of sleeping and staying away from my house and being somewhat independent on a college campus. Again, that was for 3 summers in a row. So first 2 summers, you're campers kind of, and then the 3rd summer you're an intern, so you mentor the younger kids that are part of the program. So that was incredibly helpful. I'm not sure if other states besides Washington has that, but you should look into that and see if that's a possibility.
There's one in California, there's one in Utah, there's one in Texas, there's one here in DC. They all go by different names. I do want to say, though, for a lot of you, college is definitely a long way away, and it's good to start thinking about it. But I would say the 2 things that are most important for preparing you and your family for the future is start helping your child advocate for themselves and get them involved in the disability community, because it is incredibly meaningful and incredibly important to have other youth and other adults who have disabilities who can teach them anything from self-advocacy to independence skills to disability pride. There is a whole national movement centered on being proud of who you are as a person with a disability. So 2 things that I definitely think you should remember are get your child involved in the community, which check, awesome, good job, you're here, you've done that. And then teaching your child good self-advocacy skills, because that will be an incredible asset and an incredible value to them everywhere they go.
So tell me a little bit about employment. I think we covered a lot about college, but you guys are employed. How did you find your jobs? How receptive to adaptations has your employer been? What have your experiences been?
So for me, I, for the longest time, due to my own medical needs and my disability over the years, I've been a patient at Seattle Children's. So from day one, I've always known that I want to work there someday. So for me, it was, I had to apply. I applied for quite a few positions there, and I didn't get a position right away, but I really knew I wanted to work there. And so I was able to get a job there. And I was just really honest with my employer and my boss, and I said, look, I know I can thrive in this position, but in order to thrive in this position, I need X, Y, and Z accommodations for me to be able to get around the office and do my job productively. And just being honest and upfront about it really was helpful for me. And they were really easy to work with and compliant too. They understood, as a children's hospital, they want to employ employees who represent the company and represent the people that they serve. So they were all over it. So I had a positive experience with that. I know that may not be true for all employers and places to work, but for me, fortunately, it worked out quite nicely.
So I actually worked as a youth transition coordinator as an intern for the Center for Independent Living in Maine. And when I was in my last year of college, my old boss sent me this job, which is a fellowship and does end at the end of August, so I will be unemployed until then, or after then. But I found this 1.5-year fellowship that allowed me to work with young people with disabilities all over the country. And I said, yeah, I can move to Washington, D.C. I can do that. But one of the reasons I was so comfortable doing that is because I had previous experience in employment. I did internships in my local community. I worked at a camp for kids with disabilities, a stayover camp all summer for 3 years, which was an incredible, incredible experience. But I also knew how to ask for accommodations. Legally, under the ADA, employers are required to give you reasonable accommodations. Now, that's kind of a broad term, and that looks a little bit different for everyone else. But there are agencies such as Evoke Rehab, such as Centers for Independent Living, that can help you and help your child ask for these reasonable accommodations. Normally, you already know what they are. You know yourself pretty well. You know your needs. You know this would be helpful but isn't exactly necessary. And those are the things that you have to not necessarily pitch to your employers, but you have to lay out in very layman's terms and say, this is what I need in order to be the most successful in my job, in my career. A lot of people that I talk to who are young people have this fear that, like, oh, I'm disabled. Who's going to want to hire me? Who's going to want to employ me? But I think someone said last night, people with disabilities actually have higher sets of problem-solving skills. They have higher retention in long-term jobs, and they have higher overall happiness and success rates in the positions they do hold. And that is something that you can use to your advantage. We are a valued community with valuable skill sets, and that is something that you need to remember as you apply, as you market yourself, as you put yourself out there, as you network. The community is a huge tool, and that's how I found my current job, and I am 100% sure it's how I'll find my next job, because I have a backbone of a community that's strong, that's independent, and that supports me.
Thanks, Kings. We just have about 5, 6, 7 minutes left, so I want to ask a couple big picture questions. How did your parents facilitate your transition to adulthood? And maybe I'll just start with Liam.
So for me, my parents made it obvious at a young age that eventually I would have to get out of the house and live on my own. So from the very beginning, they made it clear that I needed to eventually start speaking for myself and stand up for what I need. And I think that was very beneficial, especially in high school, to learn that in a setting where I think it's a little bit more safe to do that, or you feel a little bit more comfortable. And you can start small, So it was easy to speak to teachers and stuff like that, and then it grows over time. And when I mentioned OBR a little bit earlier, and so whenever we do those meetings, I'm usually the one talking and telling them, exactly what I need, because I'm the one at college, not my parents. So for me, it's nice because, you get to be independent, and my parents made it clear that, I need to be independent. Not just my parents, also the people around me, like, Luke, for example, made it obvious that, independence is possible regardless of, all different types of disabilities and different, abilities in general. So I think that was the main thing.
Yeah, I had sort of a similar experience where there wasn't really a doubt that I was going to have to go to college, or at the very least, do something that would not be at my house, whatever that may be. And so that process, I think what you guys were talking about with advocating for yourself was very helpful with that, because I sort of learned how to speak up for myself and go through that college application process and sort of managing my healthcare, like, on my own, obviously with help from my parents. They didn't just throw me out to the wolves, but I was the one controlling that and making sure that it worked. And it went from, in high school, me not really doing much of that at all, to by the time I was halfway through college, I was running all of that. And my parents got a lot better at accepting that and letting me, I know my body, I know my care, I know what I need by that point, because that's the whole point of advocating for yourself, and trusting that I was doing okay, and that if I needed help, I would call them, I would talk to them, and get advice, and we would figure it out. But on the day-to-day, sort of letting me live my life with trial and error and making mistakes, because everyone makes mistakes in college and doesn't quite know how to do everything perfectly, but that's the whole point. And you get better and you learn, and now I feel like I'm in a much better position trying to find a job, for me mentally and physically, than I was when I was going to college.
I also just want to highlight the fact that I went to camp when I was 6. So for those who did not go to MBA Camp or have not gone, MBA Camp is a week-long event. It's a very fun thing to do, and like I said, I went to camp when I was 6, and I went for 12 years. So that, for me personally, was the biggest thing for growing independence and confidence. And actually, I'll be having my camp counselor next year be one of my attendants at college. So there's a lot of similarities between the two, and it's nice to get away from your parents for once for a week and have that separation. But it's essentially you're living on your own with the help of somebody who wants to see you grow as a human being. So camp for me personally was enormous. You got to meet a lot of interesting people similar to yourselves, meet some people different to yourselves, and it's enormous. So I highly recommend doing it if you haven't already.
There was no doubt in my parents' mind that I was moving out at some point. I was actually, ready to jump the gun and moved away the summer before my first college experience because I got a job in rural Maine at the camp that I talked about. And my parents were like, oh, we get 3 months off. That's great. But they set up expectations before me for that. There were expectations that I would do well in public school, in middle and high school. There were expectations that I would keep my room tidy and, do my homework and socialize and be involved in extracurricular activities and have a full plate just as anyone else would have a full plate. And so those expectations and those disciplines were set up very early, which helped me prepare for the success later in life. I would also say that it was really helpful to have a sibling who challenged me in a competitive state, not necessarily physically, but in grades, in social skills, in just everything. I really like being challenged and being pushed, and it was good for me to have that comparison.
We are getting ready to wrap up because I think we have a hard stop at 1. I feel like I could talk to you guys all day. But what would you, so I have just a couple more questions that I want to try and get in, and maybe I'll start with Angela. What would you go back and tell your 10-year-old self?
So what would I go back and tell my 10-year-old self? I would probably say don't be afraid to push yourself. For me, back when I was 10, it was apparent that I had a neuromuscular disorder, but I actually didn't get a diagnosis until I was 17, just because the type of congenital myopathy I have is very rare. So at that time, there was a lot of unknowns for my future. But I would just tell myself that just push yourself. Don't let your disability hold you back. Just because you do have this disability, it does not necessarily, it's not going to limit you, that you're capable of a lot of great things. And that just because you do have to deal with this adversity that some people may not have to deal with in their life, it won't stop you, and you can still have a really meaningful and productive life. And even though the future might be scary, there's still a lot of really good things, and that the best is always yet to come. So that's what I would tell myself.
I would say 10-year-old self, you're not alone. My parents, while they did many, many wonderful things, I was not involved in the disability community when I was 10. And so I felt very ostracized because I didn't know anyone else who had orthotics, who had epilepsy, who needed to sit down, who wasn't allowed to participate in PE. And that really scared me because I thought I was going to be isolated like that for the rest of my life. And then when I was about 14, my parents introduced me to, I went to camp that year. My parents introduced me to Easter Seals. I got to leave school because I got to go to the State House and advocate for muscular dystrophy awareness. And that was like, wait, what? There are other people that do this, that love what they do, that are really successful, that are funny, that are kind, that are smart, that have jobs. And that was a literal 180 turning point for me. And I said, wait, I love these people. I love this community. I'm proud of who I am. So I would say getting a mentor, getting involved in the disability community made a huge difference in how I accepted myself.
I would say to trust yourself and trust that you know yourself, and that if you know yourself and you know what you need and can speak for yourself, then you don't need to panic. It's going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of things you don't know. There's going to be a lot of experiences that you encounter that you're not going to know what to do, and you're not going to be able to figure it out right away, and you're going to screw things up. But that's okay, because the only way to get around that is just to go through it. And so if you can trust that you're going to be able to get through, college applications or, test season in high school or whatever, and you trust that you're going to be able to get through it, then you're going to be able to get through it, whether or not you do well on those tests or not.
You're going to screw things up. You don't need to panic.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah, I would just say everything that they said, but it's not always easy, but it's never impossible, I think is what I would say. There are barriers with disability, but when I was young, you don't really know what's coming, or you don't know what's going to happen, but there's always a way around it. There's always a secret to it. And knowing as many people and asking questions and speaking up for yourself is very important. And being aware of what you need and being able to translate that into thought and then finding somebody who can help you do that is the biggest concern, or the biggest thing to do.
Well, I think I speak for everyone here when I say thank you for being such impressive young people for us to learn from, for the younger kids out there to look up to, for the parents who are scared about their children's future to see what that might look like, and for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with us. So can we give this group a round of applause?